Hi, I'm Elizabeth Kwant, and I'm speaking with Francesca Willow today about a new art project which the Sputnik patrons have helped to fund. Francesca, I wonder, would you be happy to tell us about yourself and maybe a little bit about the project, the title and where it happened?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief, just because there's a lot. My name is Francesca Willow. I am both an artist and a climate activist. So I work across both performance and painting. I originally trained as a dancer and still do that, but also work in other mediums now as well. Um, and then I also work across trying to end the fossil fuel industry's involvement in creative spaces. So whether that be through sponsorship and co-option of the arts or through things like advertising and creative means of greenwashing, essentially. So I'm kind of across the creative and environment industries. And this project in particular is the other thing I'm really passionate about in climate is soil building as a climate solution, which I will explain. um, Generally falls under the umbrella of a principle kind of known as regeneration. So people might have heard the term sustainability before, but if you imagine sustainability is, can we keep something going at this level? The idea of regeneration is actually, can we make it better? So in terms of things like regenerating soil, it's when you're farming, when you have an allotment, when you have a garden, anything, it's making your soil healthier than when you first found it. And the reason that this is something I'm really passionate about is because it is an incredible climate solution in terms of sequesters loads and loads of CO2. If we look at all our farmland and all our soil around the world and we really focus on building that health, it can sequester huge amounts of carbon very quickly, which is really important for us as we move forward. But it's also an incredibly optimistic and very, what's the word I'm trying to say? It's an optimistic climate solution, but it's also something I'm really passionate about because I think it really shows us how we need to sort of radically transform the world and how we think about community and interpersonal relationships and sort of looking at something that we might want to mimic. So looking at the way ecosystems interact in harmony and the way that everything balances and helps each other. And I'm really passionate about how, as people, we can think about how can we emulate that more in a society that is often pushing us to do the opposite. So that was where the kind of passion came from this, from a very practical standpoint of like, we have until 2030 to really turn things around. This is one of our fastest and most powerful tools, and not a lot of people know about it. And also, if we want this long-term transformational, like better world, what better place to start than to look at the way that natural systems are working and thinking more about how we can sort of rewild ourselves. So that was where this all came from. Sorry, this actually is not very brief at all, but that's fine. Um, it all started because last year I got accepted into an art residency at a regenerative farm in Cornwall. So I had a couple of weeks there. I did some performance, I did some paintings, and then another regenerative garden farm. They've got lots of different sort of projects going on this site. Got in touch because they would be interested in me showing work, but it was a bigger space. There was more options for things, and they didn't have any funding attached. And so that was when I reached out to Sputnik because I really wanted to do the project. But I just needed that little like extra bit of help for, materials, time, getting all that stuff done. So the first iteration of this project that was called Open a Window Under My Feet, I had a lot of paintings that were done on tiles and were buried sort of in the ground. So you'd walk around the space and you'd see them buried in the ground, and it was the idea of like if you took a microscope and looked straight into the ground. So I took images from a scientist that I worked with who had samples of soil bacteria, healthy soil bacteria, and used those to create these paintings. So it was trying to give people an insight into what's actually happening that they're not thinking about, not seeing. And then with this second iteration of Open a Window Under My Feet, I had that around the space, but there was also this huge greenhouse. So I was able with the funding to make these really large, like meter by meter paintings, um, which is something I'm now continuing on with this kind of next phase of what I'm interested in, which is depicting these very diverse slightly surreal, obviously, because trees aren't, you know, pink and orange and all these colors. But trying to create these thriving like images of biodiversity and loads of different plants and things happening together, and then drawing these very small, delicate connections between them, or trying to display ideas of microbes and the things that we can't see but are also like sort of thriving under the surface. So I was able to basically make some wild, big, colorful paintings and put them all around the space, which is really great because that space is also a cafe. So through the period of time it's been there, I know like probably at least 1 or 2 thousand people come through the doors. So it's really, hopefully, you know, reached a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. I'm interested in when you talk about the content in the work and the paintings, like the forms and the subjects and the colors even, how they relate to the theme of climate justice. So I know you kind of covered that a little bit. You said about diversity in the paintings.
Mm.
But I think you were talking about community as well, and kind of looking at
Um,
how the soil can be a picture for us as well. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
it's actually really incredible. I will try and give a very potted science lesson. Um, and it's kind of ironic because one of the phrases that you'll hear people use sometimes is sometimes also used in sort of Christian contexts. So you'll talk about this beautiful exchange, which is a phrase probably some people are familiar with. And essentially what happens is you have a lot of microbes in soil. So in a healthy teaspoon of soil, you have, I think it's something like 10,000 microbes. There are more microbes in soil than there are just sort of humans on Earth. Um, and those microbes are very, very diverse. So the healthier your soil is, you want as much diversity as possible. With plants, they're pulling in obviously carbon dioxide from the air and they're using it to build themselves. And what happens is through their root system, and through something called mycorrhizal fungi. We don't need to get into all the details, but the plant and these microbes start to communicate with each other. So the plant was like, I will give you sugars and starches that I've made from CO2. If you, Mr. Microbes, give me vitamins and minerals and nutrients that you have that I can't access. And so they start exchanging. And the more healthy microbes you have in the soil, the more they're giving to the plant's getting healthier. And the plant is then pulling in more CO2 to give to them. So they're doing this beautiful like barter system that's making everything healthier. It's pulling in more carbon dioxide, putting it back in the soil, which is obviously where CO2 started. It was in the ground, put it back in the ground. But they have this incredible harmony. So there's sort of no waste. This is something I talk about, it's talked about in climate communities, like waste is human, like nothing in nature creates waste. A waste product from one thing goes somewhere else to another thing in the ecosystem. And so there's loads of sort of co-benefits to that, because more diversity of your microbes, you've got a plant that's more filled with vitamins and minerals. When you then eat it, it's better for you. You also have a plant that is healthier and more, has a much stronger sort of plant immune system. Because, for instance, you will have an ability to fight off pests, fight off disease. It would be like just a healthier, stronger plant, be less weak and able to fall prey to things. And you also then have all these other things that kind of come, like if you imagine just a wild space versus like a monoculture, they're very, very different. You also have a lot more like water security because, again, I'll try not, sorry, lots of science, but you can't really
No, it's fine.
but healthy soil, if you imagine unhealthy soil, kind of like that loose, horrible dirt that's very dry, versus healthy, which is very like moist and clumpy. Water filters through that as it falls on the ground. So you have less flooding, you have more resilience of your actual spaces. So all these things are actually designed to protect, it protects the wider environment as well, because of the way that these things are working. Suddenly you stop an area flooding, you're more resistant to drought, you're more resistant to weather, you're healthier, and then whatever else in the ecosystem is eating the plant is healthier. So it has all these knock-on effects that we don't even necessarily know the full extent of yet. And that all comes initially from this relationship of, I give you something, you give me something, and we all work together. It's essentially like a model for collaboration.
So I'm interested to know, how does that come out in your work? Like in terms of the subjects in the paintings, your choice of colours?
Yeah, sorry, these are long explanations, but obviously
No,
a lot
no,
of
it's
thoughts going
fine
into it.
because it's the
And
background, isn't it?
yeah, so I think that was why I really color was quite a key thing for me. And there is a lot of color to be found naturally. I found this when I worked with this scientist, Dr. Elsa Hess, and she showed me her images of the bacteria. They weren't all black and white and brown. There was bright colors. I went to the lab and she showed me bacteria that were naturally like luminous orange, I think it was. And I thought that was a color that couldn't be made really in nature. So things that I didn't know about, which was really interesting. But I think I was really wanting to show this sense of joyfulness because I think no community is ever going to be perfect when we talk about human beings. We literally are human. But I think because it's something we want to aspire to, I want to show this sense of joy and hope around what we want to get to. And also, I always think of this quote that was like, if the revolution doesn't have dancing, then I don't want to be part of it. That's slightly misquoted, but like this idea that if we want to build a better world, we can't always just look at the things that are bad and need changing. We do need to know that, but we also have to be able to dream and imagine of what we want to replace it with. Because otherwise, how is anyone going to want to get on board with making things better if the only focus is this is all wrong and you have no sort of hope or a picture of like, this is actually what we're going to try and create in its place. Like, yes, we want to get rid of these bad systems, but this is what we want instead. We want community and cooperation and collaboration, and we want radical kindness and generosity. Like, you have to give things for people to see and have hope to work towards so that we can build and put in the sort of stages of the plan to get there. So for me, it was about creating something. Obviously, you want people to see something and be really captured by it so they come and look at it. And when I've exhibited, I always have information, like not just like acrylic on canvas, but I try and have explanation as you go around so that you kind of learn as you're seeing the art, because for a lot of people, they don't know anything about this topic. And I want it to be, I try and write it in an accessible way so that people can also learn and hopefully get involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, a big part is like, you hear people talk about different ideas of like utopias, and we have to be able to dream and imagine in order to create something. So that's a really big part of what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to make things be joyful, not just completely scientifically accurate.
Yeah. I was also really interested in like your choice of installing the work in the soil itself and like in the greenhouse. Like they're really non-traditional spaces and it's outdoors as well, so it's open to the elements. I wondered, A, have you exhibited outdoors before? And also, what were your choices around why did you want to put the work, in these place specific locations? And I wonder if you can even expand on it in terms of, did you feel like that helped people to view those issues differently, like by its context in the gardens? Sorry, there's a
Yeah,
number of
oh,
questions.
sorry. No, it's all right. I hadn't exhibited outside before, but I had performed outside before because I come from this dance background, and nearly all of my dance career has been performing in non-traditional spaces. Um, since I graduated, I haven't done a lot of work that's in a theatre, and I found that I became really passionate about that because of the type of people that were quote unquote coming through the doors. Sometimes there wasn't doors, obviously. Um, but I became quite passionate about connecting to people and trying to make things accessible to people that might feel like this isn't something for them because they might feel excluded. They can be made to feel I'm not smart enough. I haven't done a degree in this. And I don't like that exclusionary side of certain types of the art and performance world. That's not something that I'm particularly interested in. Um, so I got really passionate about that quite early on in my career because I just had such profound and moving experiences with talking to people who'd maybe never seen performance before, didn't know anything about dance, and you could see they were quite nervous even to talk about it. And to get that experience of being like, no, that's great that you saw that, and that's really valid. And I don't know, just like touching people in that way was really powerful for me. Um, and with this soil stuff, it's something I've actually been thinking about for a long time. And some of that was sort of paused by the pandemic because I'd done some sort of dance research in it at the end of 2019. Then things stopped for a while. And I had been like, I just had a little bit of a disconnect of trying to figure out what is the best way to communicate this. I'm not sure how to get this across because I had a little experience of doing something in a more of a theatre space, and people were being like, oh, you could like bring soil into the space. And I was like, no, that's the opposite of what I want to do. Because also, unless we regenerate our soils, we only have a certain amount of years of topsoil left. And I was like, I'm not using it on a dance performance. We need that. And then when this opportunity came up, it was kind of like it clicked into place for the first stage of this residency because they had different host sites. And one of them was this regenerative farm that I already knew. Sorry. And I was like, oh, why have I never thought of going and doing it sort of in the farm, in the space? So it kind of grew from there because that first stage of like thinking about what I was going to do was informed by me literally going up to the site and sitting there. And I think I really got passionate about this idea of putting it in the soil because that wasn't like always the initial plan. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. But I think it's literally under our feet. It's not something that people are necessarily like thinking about ever. And so it's like, how do you get that off of the textbook and get people to care? Because there is also a lot of scientific study around, and I'm sure you could talk to anyone who's got an allotment, they probably agree. When you actually get your hands in the ground and when you actually garden, when you do all these things, people report feeling like so much more joyful, so much more connected to natural systems. But if that's not your like lived reality already, you're just not thinking about it. So it was kind of this like, what can I do to get people to look down and to think about this and maybe even like crouch down and just think about it. And so that was why it's sort of almost like this, well, it's literally called open a window under my feet. So it's like you're getting this little insight into what's down there and hopefully just sparking different like connections because also none of us would be alive if we didn't have these healthy soil systems. We'd have no food. We would, yeah, that it wouldn't function. And but no one's walking around and thinking, oh, what's under my feet right now is actually one of the main components that's keeping me alive.
Yes.
So it was trying to just change those perspectives around a bit.
Yeah.
It's been really fun. So
It's really
I mean,
interesting as well, like that kind of I think with your background being performance, and in a sense, although they're paintings, like you're in effect creating a performance piece because you're embedding them in the soil and inviting people to come and interact with them. And like you said, you're inviting people to walk over them or like crouch down and look at them. And I really like this idea of, the soil being really dark and kind of not colorful at all. And then you kind of stumble across like this beautiful, vivid, tile. Like you said, that the way that the tiles like got really bright colors as well, just kind of draws you in. And I think kind of subverts some of those things because I think often, some of those issues you can kind of feel like you've heard them or, so I think it's engaging with you differently, isn't it? Through the visual artwork kind of captures you in a different way.
yeah. And I think I want to help people like cultivate those emotions as well, because once you like dive into this world and there is so much hope in it, like I've said, but it really changes how you feel about things that you might have been neutral about before. So when you see really healthy soil and it's spongy and that darkness is actually means it's very like rich with things going on in there and you'll get really excited about it. But when you say I live in Cornwall, when you're driving around or on the train or whatever and you see a bare field that's all brown, that's been tilled, that is like the worst of the worst. And I feel like deep grief when I see that. And I'm like, no, what are they doing? But if we have loads of people who can like connect on that emotional level and that brings them in, and then they start caring about it and advocating for system change, which is starting to happen. You're seeing a lot more chat about regeneration than we were a few years ago. Both in terms of like, it's really healthy for us to have more, it's called like nature relatedness. And there's been like a ton of studies that find that the more connected we are with nature, people report improved mental well-being, and also people behave in more eco-friendly ways, because when you understand that you're part of nature, not separate from it, why would you do something to hurt yourself? You wouldn't want to. But also that's how we make change, is getting people to care. And so I hope that this is like an emotional way in, but not one that just leaves people feeling that depressed side of it. But because it's upsetting, but you're like, oh, we can actually turn this around in like 3 years. This isn't like a 100-year process. Like soil building can be done very quickly and at scale when compared to a lot of other climate things. So it's like we should be doing this like right now. So yeah, I'm just hoping to try and get those emotional responses from people, and hopefully that leads to something.
One thought that I had when I was looking at your work, and you talk about your materials a little bit as well. I was really interested to know what materials you use in the work and whether they're sustainable paints, for example, or how do those materials inform the message in a sense, and how does those issues inform how you buy materials for you personally?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no 100% like sustainable paint on the market as is.
Mm.
If someone who's watching this has heard of one that I haven't heard of yet, please let me know. So I try and work in the most like zero waste circular process I can. So all of the tiles that process came originally because I had loads of leftover tiles. So I
Mm.
was like, I should use these for something. And that has been the process with a lot of things, has been using waste materials. There's also something called scrap stores where you can go and find a lot of different things like fabric, tiles, also sometimes paints. And there's a whole network of those around the country. So you can go and find a lot of circular materials waiting for a second home. And I've done a lot of that in the past. The paints I had from the pandemic, which was a classic, like got them at the time, wasn't really thinking massively about an art practice in that way, but just it was the pandemic. We all did many things. Um, so I was like, I already have these. I'm going to use all of them until they're completely done. So that has been my approach. And that also sometimes dictates the colors you get because if one runs out, it's not like, okay, I need to go replace that and just randomly buy. It's like, no, I will use absolutely everything I already have.
Yes, yes.
And then and then also with canvases and things like that, I try and you can get sustainable, you can get organic, you
Yeah.
can there's different options that you can get linen rather than cotton, which is more sustainably grown. Um, but also there's a lot of sort of secondhand stuff kicking about, especially I live in a town that's has a big art uni.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I found things in charity shops, I found material in charity shops, all my brushes I found in charity shops. So I just, as much as possible, try and source things that already exist, things I already have, because obviously those paints are like 4 years old now. I am using and not buying any new until that is all completely used up. And then I'm hoping that there'll be more sustainable paint because the main types of painting are sort of acrylic, oil, and watercolor, and none of them are currently perfect. But there needs to be really like there's lots of different elements in terms of like systemic supply chain, things that need to change. I have actually written something on my blog about being an eco-friendly artist and all the things you can do to the best of your ability. And the only thing I think that is good about paint rather than other types of plastic or other things is at least a painting is designed to hopefully hang or be exhibited somewhere. It's designed to last. It's not
Yes, yeah.
hopefully designed to go to landfill. If you don't like the painting anymore, you can paint over the top of it.
Yes.
Um, and I'm hoping going forward to utilize more like paint that already exists, if that's leftover old paint from this bedroom, things like that, because there's been a lot of innovation in that space. There's a lot of like non-toxic, non-VOC, and I imagine there'll be a lot of leftovers of things like that. And I'm planning to work with that next, hopefully, and then see what I can find at scrap stores and things like that. So I'm trying as much as possible to use things that already exist and keep them out of waste streams.
That's great.
Um, but yeah, for any other painters that are watching, there is currently no silver bullet that I know of. But hopefully,
Where can they find your blog, Francesca?
yeah, it's ethicalunicorn.com and I am at
If you
ethical
want to read
unicorn.
the article that Francesca's written about being a sustainable artist, you can find it.
Yeah. I think if you go to ethical unicorn and search, I think it's called like how to be an eco-friendly artist or something like that. And I just compiled every resource I could find into one place. Um, yeah.
We are pretty much out of time. But I wanted to say, if anyone who's watching would like to support more artists like Francesca, then you can become a Sputnik patron, and all the details are on the link below. Um, yeah, I just really want to thank you, Francesca, for sharing more about your work. It's super interesting, and I personally love how so many aspects of it. You know, the performative aspect, the way that you're engaging people with the issues in a really unique way, the colors, So yeah, please do carry on making more artwork.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Sorry, you can't really talk about it without having to go into quite a lot of science, but hopefully it's interesting and it will get more people passionate about it, even who watch this. So, yay.